This is the second video in our series and is titled Revolution and the New Nation, and will cover the period from 1763 up until around the 1820s. The 7 Years' War had greatly expanded the English land claims in North America, but had also greatly expanded the English debt. To pay for the war, English Prime Minister George Grenville proposed that the colonies pay for their share and encouraged taxation. Over the next decade or so, the English Parliament passed a series of acts to pay for the war, as well as maintain English dominance over their colonies in North America. The first round of acts included the Sugar Act, which taxed sugar and molasses, the Currency Act, which forbade colonies from creating their own money, the Quartering Act, which forced the colonies to pay for the housing of British soldiers, and the most dreaded of all of them, the Stamp Act, which required a stamp to be bought and put on paper documents, such as legal papers, newspapers, and even playing cards. The American colonists, though, did not stand for these acts, especially after years of salutary neglect or social-political isolation from the English crown. The colonists fought back by boycotting these British goods, and eventually Parliament caved into their boycotts and removed these acts. Along with repealing the acts, the British also passed the Declaratory Act in 1766 and affirmed their right to pass their acts on the colonies as they wish. Parliament continued to tax the colonies, and in 1676 the Townshend Acts were passed. This act taxed a wide variety of commodities, such as glass, paint, paper, and worst of all for the colonists, tea. Once again, the colonists organized boycotts and were successful in removing all the taxes except for the tax on tea. Tensions, though, were still high among the colonies and their motherland, and violence would soon erupt. On March 5th, 1770, a riot broke out in Boston where 5 people were killed. This event would later be dubbed the Boston Massacre. In December of 1773, with the tax on tea still in place, and the price of it rising, angry Americans boarded 3 ships in Boston Harbor and dumped the tea into the water. Cheered by people as the Boston Tea Party, Parliament then passed the Intolerable Acts to punish Boston and made the situation worse in the North. In 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia to try to bring about unity among the colonies and a peaceful means of dealing with the British. Many of its delegates only wanted to negotiate with Britain, and few were actually calling for independence at this time. On April 19, 1775, colonial militia engaged in fighting with British soldiers at the battles of Lexington and Concord. The shot heard around the world was fired, and the revolution had begun. A month later, Vermont militia, led by Ethan Allen, took Fort Ticonderoga and all of the cannons at it. With war now seeming imminent, the Continental Congress named George Washington as the leader of the Continental Army. This body also officially declared independence from Great Britain through Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, which was adopted on the 4th of July in 1776. With Americans eager to free themselves from their motherland, they initially tried an attack on Canada, but failed. They were unsuccessful in capturing Quebec, and the American commander, Richard Montgomery, was even killed during the assault. The British also captured the city of New York and drove Washington and his men far from the city and into Pennsylvania. Washington, though, turned his retreat into victory when, on December 26, 1776, he crossed the Delaware River and sneak attacked German mercenaries who were fighting for the British at the Trenton Barracks and won the Battle of Trenton. He then continued on, and in January of 1777, once again defeated British forces at the Battle of Princeton. These quick victories gave the Americans hope that there was a chance that they could defeat one of the biggest and greatest military powers in the world at the time. October of 1777 was a good and a bad time for the American nation. American forces, under the command of Horatio Gates, won a decisive victory in upstate New York when they defeated the British under the command of General John Burgoyne at the battles of Saratoga. This battle is considered by many historians as the turning point in the American Revolution, and later would convince the French that the American cause was plausible, and they joined in Franco-American alliance. Also, in October of 1777, the British captured the city of Philadelphia and set the Continental Congress fleeing for their lives. The conflicts in the war now moved south, and in 1779, the British defeated the Americans at the Battle of Savannah, and even more embarrassing, in February of 1780, they captured the city of Charleston. The Americans, though, would soon win the war at the Battle of Yorktown in October of 1781. American and French forces were able to trap the British at this battle, and the British unconditionally surrendered, effectively ending the war. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed and officially declared the American colonies as independent from Britain. America was now a new nation with many problems. A government needed to be established to control this new nation, and in 1781, the Articles of Confederation were ratified and acted as the American form of government. The Articles of Confederation, though, created a very, very weak central government, which soon became problematic, and Shays' Rebellion in 1786 exposed this weakness, and American leaders called for a new form of government. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia and would create our modern form of government under the Constitution. During the convention, multiple compromises were made among delegates of different states in order to ratify the Constitution. One of the issues, such as representation, came about after Edmund Randolph of Virginia proposed the Virginia Plan and William Paterson of New Jersey proposed the New Jersey Plan. Virginia, a large state, wanted representation based on population, while New Jersey, a smaller state, hoped for representation to be equal among the states. Roger Sherman of Connecticut created a compromise to this issue and created a bicameral legislature of a House of Representatives and a Senate. The Constitution, though, would go on to be ratified, and in 1789, George Washington was elected unanimously as our nation's first president. Washington established a strong cabinet of advisors, in which he had Thomas Jefferson as a Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton as a Secretary of the Treasury, and Henry Knox as a Secretary of War. Although this new nation would face many issues, both among its leaders and with foreign powers, it would see its way through Alexander Hamilton's economic plans, the Whiskey Rebellion, and the Jay Treaty. In 1796, John Adams was elected America's second president, and once again, the new nation faced many issues. Due to the Jay Treaty and other pro-Anglo-American interactions, the United States found itself at odds with France. Adams sent a group of diplomats to France to negotiate an easement of these tensions. Instead of being welcomed, they were encountered by French agents who demanded a $12 million loan from the United States to this new French Republic and a $250,000 bribe to even talk with the French government. Negotiations never came about, and this incident became known as the XYZ Affair. The XYZ Affair soon heightened hostilities with France, and this led to an undeclared sea war in the Caribbean known as the Quasi-War. Hostilities within the United States rose even more, and Congress passed the Naturalization Act, which extended the amount of time it took to become a citizen, and the Alien Sedition Acts, which allowed the president to deport anyone who he saw as a threat to this nation, and forbade talking negatively about the government. Thomas Jefferson was elected president in 1800, and he would serve 2 terms in office. His term began with the landmark Supreme Court case, Marbury v. Madison. During the case, the Supreme Court gave itself the ability of judicial review or reviewing the constitutionality of laws. The highlight of Jefferson's presidency was in 1804 with the Louisiana Purchase. The second term of Jefferson's presidency was plagued by the U.S. being caught in England and France's struggle during the Napoleonic Wars. Specifically, American merchants had difficulty trading with either country because both countries were preventing the Americans from trading and benefiting the nation which they were at war with. American sailors often found themselves impressed by the British Navy, and both sides prohibited trading from American merchants. In 1807, Congress passed the Embargo Act, which prohibited all exports to Europe and restricted certain imports from Great Britain. Although viewed by Jefferson as a measure to prevent war, it only created hard economic times for New England and would soon bring the country to war with Great Britain once again. James Madison became president in 1809, and with the presidency came all of the issues that Jefferson did not resolve. In June of 1812, the United States had decided to declare war on Great Britain. Staunch pro-war members of Congress, called war hawks, pushed this declaration through, citing increased impressment and increased numbers of Indian attacks, which were supported by the British on the frontier, for the need to go to war. Federalist-controlled New England staunchly opposed this war due to fear of economic issues from the suppression of trade. Initially, the war was a complete failure for the United States. American military leaders first attempted a three-pronged attack at Canada. The invasion force was able to capture the city of York and had burned it to the ground, but the attack overall failed and America was forced out of Canada. Even more embarrassing for the United States, on the counterattack by the British, they were able to capture Detroit without the Americans firing one shot in defense. American forces, though, were able to stop the British at the Great Lakes. In 1813, Oliver Hazard Perry led Americans to victory at the Battle of Lake Erie, and this stopped all further invasion from Canada. Also in 1813, William Henry Harrison was able to defeat the Indian leader Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames. This halted an increasing Indian alliance to attack the United States on the west. In 1814, the British scored a major victory at the Battle of Bladensburg. This defeat left the newly built American capital of Washington, D.C. vulnerable, and the British invaded and burned major buildings to the ground. The Americans, though, were able to repulse an attack on the city of Baltimore at the Battle of Fort McHenry in September of 1814. A young Baltimore lawyer named Francis Scott Key watched this battle unfold as he sat on a British ship. He decided to write a poem about the events, and this poem would go on to become our national anthem. The war being fought to a stalemate, both sides began to enter negotiations, and on December 24th, 1814, the Treaty of Ghent was signed in Belgium and officially ended the war. Although not aware of the peace, the British attacked the southern United States, and Andrew Jackson became a national hero by repulsing this attack at the Battle of New Orleans.